The True Ambition podcast with John Zink is brought to you by IT Avalon. IT Avalon, IT staffing and professional services done right. Visit our sponsor at itavalon.com. Now, welcome to True Ambition.
Welcome everyone to the True Ambition podcast. My name is John Zink, and today my special guest is over Zoom, and he is zooming in from the Austin, Texas area. It's somebody I've known for a while, been a client of mine and an acquaintance and friend, and it's Mr. Alan Stickler. And Alan is the CTO of a company called Urgent Care for Kids, and we're going to find out more about that company here after a while. You're in Round Rock, Texas?
Yep.
And how far outside of Austin is that?
Round Rock's just north, so maybe 5-10 miles north of Austin.
Okay. I've never been to Austin before, and you know me, I'm a music guy. I can't believe I've not been out there before.
Yeah. When the world comes back together, we'll definitely have you out here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So you were born in Boston, Massachusetts.
That's right.
Tell me about Boston. What was it like growing up out there?
It was great. I mean, it was, we lived in a small house. It was a lot colder. You know, the thing about Boston when I talk to people is in Boston, everyone's super loyal. So if your grandparents weren't friends, you're probably not making it into that social circle. People just been around forever, and I took public transportation everywhere. I think it was after college when I moved back when I finally learned and I knew how to drive, but I didn't know how to drive around the streets of Boston. I just always taken public transportation, so it was just super easy. Didn't really know what the world was like. I went to school in Missouri, so that was my first time really leaving Boston. I visited other places, but didn't have an appreciation for just how tight-knit it was there and the group of friends I had. But now it's the kind of place where I love to visit, but I don't think I could live back up there again.
I'm actually, my wife and I are getting ready to go on a road trip. So I know that I've talked to you since, but I've got a little 2-year-old boy named Johnny. And we're taking him back because of COVID. The only person in my family who's met Johnny has been my mom. So we're going to take off on like a 3-week road trip back to a bunch of different places, but end up back in Illinois. And it's funny you talk about the loyalty thing. You know, I grew up in a really small town in Northwest Illinois, and talk about loyalty. I mean, it's just you either belonged or you didn't belong. And if you didn't belong, you were not welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to school in Missouri. My best friend, college roommate has lived in Illinois most of his life. And, when I would visit him and we would go around, like you could tell who he was close with and who he had nothing to do with. Like it was one or the other. There were no two scenarios there either. So very similar.
Well, we had, I was about 3 hours straight west of Chicago, and we hated people from Chicago. We're like, you need to leave right now. So it was interesting. I love Chicago now. It's one of those things where I think if you grow up in a small town and you get very territorial, and you don't like people that aren't like you, or maybe it's fear. I'm not sure what it is, but I always remember that. It's like, oh, they're from Chicago.
So growing up, were you a White Sox fan or a Cubby fan?
None of the above. I'm a musician, and my dad wasn't really into sports. And I loved playing baseball, but I just never got into any teams because my dad just wasn't into it, So it took me until I moved to Minneapolis until I got into football, and I'm still a huge Vikings fan, which is a huge curse for me because they never win the big one.
Yeah.
But your wife is named Jamie.
Yep.
And you got 3 sons. So I just got the one boy. So you have Elliot, is it Shia and Dove? Dove. And 2 dogs, Grayson and Harley. So and you got fish and snails too. So you got a busy household going on over there.
I hate to admit it, but my kids will catch me watching our snails. Like we got this fish tank and we had algae, so I got some snails just to clean it up. But I'll just watch those stupid snails like, run around. I find them really interesting. Like they're probably the most interesting part of my house right now.
That's awesome. So I'm busy with 1 2-year-old. What's it like to have 3 sons all that age? I mean, are they all into sports and stuff, or what's?
Yeah. So 2 are baseball players. They play year round. My oldest plays probably at the highest level you can play at in Austin, as kind of when he was 14 and now as the freshman. All 3 played football. So I'm the president of the youth football league in Round Rock. I coach the 2 younger ones right now. But the middle schooler plays in middle school. The high schooler is starting tight end for his freshman team. And then I got the little one. And then they all play basketball. We're pretty busy. Yeah, I mean, we wanted them to be busy. My wife and I both, were busy growing up, both played sports, kind of kept us out of trouble, if you will. And not that my kids get in trouble, but we just find that when you've got a lot to do, you don't waste a lot of time, right? You don't goof off as much. When the time you have, you spend on things that matter, whether that's your sport or homework or whatever it is.
So are they all tall like dad?
Yeah, my oldest is 15. I'm trying to think. He's 5'11" right now, but 175. So he's a pretty big kid. He'll probably max out about 6'1". I don't think he's going to get to 6'5" like I am, but the youngest one, he has a good shot at it. He's a little more on that trajectory. But they're all big kids.
Yeah, that's cool. We took Johnny in for his 2-year, and doctor said, well, he's going to be somewhere between 6'4" and 6'5". And if you remember, I'm a little bit shorter than you. I'm like 6'3", and super excited about having a big boy. It's a little bit easier when you're a big guy.
Yeah. I always told my kids, like 6'1", 6'2" is about, if you're not going to play professional sports, 6'1", 6'2" is about as good as it gets. Because after that, everything gets a little more difficult. Plane rides, cars, you can kind of max out a little bit. So.
Yeah, watch your head.
Exactly.
So I was thinking about this when I was getting ready for talking with you. I just watched a movie. It's a show called The Social Dilemma the other night. And it's talking about social media and kids. And, of course, I'm worried about Johnny growing up. How do you deal with impressionable boys and social media? Because I watched that the other night. It just scared the hell out of me. I mean, give me a little bit of insight into how you're dealing with it in your household.
Yeah, so I think so with my 15-year-old in particular, it's tough, right? I mean, we kept him away from that stuff as long as we could. The biggest risk at one point was sort of the YouTubes of the world. Like, what are they seeing on there and being exposed to? We put a lot of energy into teaching them kind of what was okay and what's not, right? We don't worry as much anymore about what they see in a movie because they've really been we've groomed them. We've taught them what they need to understand. But then you look at the social media stuff now. I think they get a good exposure to a lot of things through it, but a lot of it's really silly stuff. The hardest thing I have is just getting my kid out of the phone, right? Is just saying you can't be in there all the time. Because he's an athlete and because the other 2 kind of follow behind my oldest, we're able to have a pretty good conversation with him about what he puts out there in the internet, that impression sticks with him forever, that coaches are looking at that stuff. And I think that's put a good coloring to how he looks at that stuff. And he's a pretty silly kid. He's kind of goofy. But trying to put a lens on like how someone else might interpret things, I think does him well. And he tries to keep that in light, on that kind of stuff. So I think it's hard. And it's only going to get harder, right? The stuff that's Snapchat and some of the stuff didn't even exist a few years ago. And if it did, it was really niche. And these things are going to be out soon. They're going to be gone. There'll be something else in place. And so it's definitely getting harder.
Yeah, my wife and I always kid around that thank God some of this stuff wasn't around when we were coming up.
Yeah, but they're also a little bit more apt to it. They've grown up with it. And so it's also not special. And so, I think the hard part is, honestly, the hard part is the amount of stuff that's out there. the important part is just building trust. And so, we really work hard to build trust with my son and make sure he understands he can come to us to talk about stuff and that we're trusting him to do certain things. But we want to have some checks and balances in that. And he's been really respectful of that so far. So
Awesome. Well, thank you. I was surprised to see that you're a big Bare Naked Ladies fan. And that's cool with me. One of my favorite songs ever is Brian Wilson. So I'm a pretty big fan of theirs as well. They're just great musicians. So how many times you seen them? You just give it a guess.
I would say probably 15 to 20 times on the low side. They were at the first concert I think I ever went to. I went to see one of the, Horde Fest or one of those types of deals up in what was Great Woods in Boston with, I think it was actually with my wife. I think she was, when we were dating, was one of the first concerts I ever went to, and they were the headliner. I didn't have idea who they were. I borrowed a CD or maybe a cassette even from my brother to record in just to get a feel for what the music was. And I've just always followed them forever. And we actually went on a cruise once. So my wife's favorite band is Guster, which is another great band. And
great band.
They're from Boston. They were used to get hooked up a lot together. So they toured together a lot. And they used to do this boat cruise with Six Man. And so we did that with them once. So I've got a bunch of pictures and stuff hanging out with both of the bands. And just, we were watching Guster, and then we've got the members of the Bare Naked Ladies watching Guster with us. Like, it was just a really cool experience. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan, and just everything they've ever done. Like, it's just really fun music that just sets the right tone, and they're just great musicians. So I really enjoy it.
Well, one of the main guys quit a few years back, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that was tough. He was so good.
Yeah, and he did a solo thing too that I thought I still enjoy. It's not quite the same because you just don't have the energy of the whole group, but yeah, they've been doing it for a long time. Like, it kind of dates you when you say you're a Bare Naked Ladies fan, but
I'm okay with dating myself nowadays, bro. I'm getting close to 50.
Yeah, I think when you asked, I had to think about it, but that's really the only one that comes to mind anymore. So
that's cool.
Stands the test of time for me.
Well, I was thinking back, we've known each other for 10 plus years now. I think funny thing is here in a few weeks, I'm going to be doing a podcast with somebody else, Latha Subramanian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Latha. I placed Latha with you years ago when you were at McKesson Specialty. It might have been U.S. Oncology at the time.
It was right after we were acquired, but yeah.
Okay. But now she's a senior manager over at Salesforce now.
Okay.
I think, and I had every time I talk to her, she asks about you. So, just a great lady. So, going through your background and digging into your background a little bit, tell me about you as a kid. Were you a good student?
I was never really a good student. I actually can't think of a time in my life that I was a really good student. I had a tough. I did fine at school. That's not true. I did pretty well in high school, but middle school I went to a private school. Pretty, really good school, but the curriculum was really tough. And back then, I didn't realize, but my parents discovered I had a learning disability. So at some point during that process, I ended up getting pulled out of recess and that kind of stuff, and started working with someone.
Do you mind talking about what type?
I actually don't know. I was a little kid, so I don't really remember. But it had to do with how when I would hear something, kind of turning that into memory. So I just, a lot of times, like, I would hear it and I would understand it when it was said, but it didn't turn into anything. Like, it just went out one ear, literally in one ear and out the other. And it would start with, it could be anything from silly things like we used to live in a split ranch in Boston, and my mom would send me downstairs to get something, and I would hear her say it, but then I'd walk downstairs, and by the time I got down there, I had no idea what she was asking for. And they always chalked that up for when I was younger as just being me not paying attention. But as I got a little older and went through school and did some testing, they found out that there was something going on there, and so just spent a lot of time figuring out how to turn those things that I was hearing into memories, to actually figuring it out and putting it together. A lot of writing and just, figuring out what the key points are, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
That was probably, I want to say that was early middle school, probably those days. By the time I got to high school, it was a little bit different. But yeah, so back then had a lot of trouble, kind of worked through that. Got to high school, decided to go to a public high school in Boston. Didn't go to, I was originally supposed to be, I lived in Boston, so I was supposed to go to a very, very large school, high minority population, but just kind of one in 1,000 plus kids. Ended up kind of busing, if you will, but actually my mom drove me every day to another town in Boston who didn't have enough students. And so they allowed other places to bring students in. I ended up in a class of 50 students. And I actually did really well there, if I remember correctly. I mean, my grades were much better there. I found it made much easier. I'm sure I made some adjustments from all the stuff I learned prior to that. But it was actually so easy, I didn't pick up any of the really good, study habits I should have had going into college. So hard again. But yeah, I guess I was a good student in high school, but that was about it.
Well, one of the things that we had talked about before was you had told me earlier about you had a job assisting a custodial crew, and that led to something bigger. And what you just talked about is, going through that learning disability, you probably had to work a little bit harder to get through some of the things that, maybe a normal person going through learning those things might have to go through. Tell me about that. I think you said it was a summer job.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So I pretty much started working, I think in Boston, when I was growing up, you had to be 16 to work. And so I started working a couple weeks before my 16th birthday and odd end jobs. So I worked at, grocery stores and, all kinds of random places. But one summer, my dad got me, my dad worked for the unions for AFSCME up north. And he had really good relationships with a lot of the state management, guys. So he knew of some people looking for, or the guy who ran the Department of Mental Health in Boston, and ended up working for, they just really wanted to give some opportunities for some kids, but the building itself is called the Lindemann Building, and it's an older building. It actually won architectural awards for whenever it was built, probably in the 70s or something like that. But it just didn't have the maintenance it needed. So they brought in some kids to help them out clean up the office. And it's literally what it was. It was going around cleaning up trash. It was scrubbing down walls because they had tar from when they still had smoking in them, all kinds of stuff. It was grunt work at the end of the day. It's funny, that building itself actually is in the movie The Departed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this really crazy staircase, which is completely against every code that exists today. And it takes about 10 minutes to walk up. But you can see Matt Damon walking up this crazy staircase to what's supposed to be the police headquarters in Boston. And that's actually now a conference, or it was when I was there, it was a conference room in the Fulton Center because there's no handicap accessibility or anything. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I did that job for the summer. Because I was working so hard and I was, really just focused on my job, and I had a pretty smart kid. The lead guy let me do extra tasks like building stuff, carts and kind of thing. So he kind of recognized that I was working really hard and, did my best along the way. Didn't get into trouble, that kind of stuff. And so the next year they ended up extending the program. And I ended up doing, and a couple kids had quit too. So, I didn't quit on it. I just did the job because that's what was needed. But the next year they asked me to come back, and I was put on a completely different area. I ended up going to the state had commissioned work to be done for kind of preparation for Y2K, which, if you remember, was kind of every computer in the world was going to die.
Yeah, airplanes are falling out of the sky.
So they commissioned this large consulting group. I don't remember who it is anymore, but I remember it was a multi-million-dollar project. And then they hired a bunch of interns to go around to each computer and every workstation across the state, in this case, the Department of Mental Health, run a utility so that they could then go and plan which ones could be saved and upgraded, which ones had to be trashed. And then we did surveys of all the users. So what did they know? How much training was going to be involved in all of this? Well, I remember the first week we got deployed to start doing this. I went to a site, I don't remember what it was, but I put the disk in, ran the utility, and it didn't work. It was literally the first thing we did. We were the first group, and it didn't work. I called our contact, whoever it was, the head of IT at the time. Ended up going back to the central office and sitting with him for about 8 hours where we rewrote a batch file to make this thing work. And what the problem was, these things were built for Windows 95, which kind of tells you when it was,
Right.
or Windows NT, either way. All of these computers are Windows 3.1, so they weren't even close. And so, but working with this guy, he and I were able to figure it out. I had never written a line of code before. I didn't know what a batch file was. I really didn't know what a batch file was afterwards either. I just knew we fixed it. And we were able to go out and fix all these and run these utilities, kind of get back on track afterwards. But that was really my first real exposure to really what coding is, what computers are. And that was right before school. I ended up going off to college, I think the next year, as an aerospace engineering major. That was my focus, and did that for a year, decided that wasn't for me, wanted to get into computers kind of based on that experience. And another year later, I was at a career fair, maybe a year or two later. I was at a career fair at the school, and you kind of go around, and certain companies have really big lines. It's really tough to get through. But I was talking to one of the recruiters at Microsoft, and I basically told her that story, and she was blown away that you can kind of go from custodian to doing these computer diagnostics. Actually helped set up those computers too. I set up several hundred compact computers back then. And so that got me in the door. Like, it didn't get me the job, but that got me in the door to have a conversation and interview for Microsoft. And then I ended up doing an internship with them as well. So,
Well, it just goes to show, I think, that a lot of people ask me, I go out and do different speaking engagements for people who are looking for jobs and stuff. And I run an IT staffing company. So people are looking for me to help them get jobs, help find people, and I'll go out and talk to people, and it's like, you really have to put yourself out there. The harder you work and the harder you network, the more you network with people. And if you do all those things and keep doing them, good things are bound to happen. So it was interesting. I wanted to go through that story because I thought it was just awesome about being young, going out there and just working your butt off and putting yourself out there to go and talk to a recruiter at Microsoft, and next thing you know, you're summer interning there. So I just thought it was a wonderful story to help people out. So how long were you at Microsoft for? Just one summer?
Yeah, I did it for one summer. So I went to the program where I went to school was 4.5 years, assuming you do some form of co-op, so you lose a semester, which I didn't do. So I did it after my senior year, actually. Is that right? No, I did it after my junior year. So I did it after my junior year. Talked about going back after my senior year for another internship before my last semester. My wife and I had actually gone out and spent some time. She came out there with me, or she was my girlfriend at the time, and we just decided it was really far from Boston. Seattle is a really long way from Boston, and
it's a whole other world.
Yeah, it's like a 5.5 hour flight or something. And when I went in the summer, it was amazing. It was so much fun up there. It rained every day for like 5 minutes, and it was beautiful afterwards. And it wasn't crazy hot, and it was just such a great time. We had so much fun out there. But when I went back, I interviewed in person there in the fall, and I don't think I saw the sun the entire time I was there. Like, it was dark the whole time. It was just a very different experience. And so after that, I decided to back out, and just didn't feel like it was a place that I wanted to live right then. So we decided we wanted to be back in Boston.
My in-laws live out in Half Moon Bay, which is just outside of San Francisco here. And every once in a while we'll go and visit them, and they have like 5 or 6 days a year where the sun's out, and the rest of the time it's just socked in with fog. I'm like, how do you live here?
Yeah, it's crazy for me. Like I said, yeah, we just decided it was better to be in Boston. That's where we grew up. That's where our family was, and family's important to us. Even though we live nowhere near them now, it was really important to us coming out of school.
So digging into your background, pretty early on in your career, you were in a leadership role or in a management role. Is that something that you did by design, or did that just kind of happen by happenstance?
Yeah, it definitely was not by design. So the place that I ended up working when I graduated was a place called Steel Point Technologies. I had done an internship for them. So prior to going to Microsoft, I had worked at Steel Point. And again, my brother made an introduction. I did tech support for them. And it wasn't a crazy, complicated job, but I really enjoyed it. It's where I taught myself how to do databases. Like their whole system was based on top of a database, and I learned really quickly that if you could understand the database, you could understand the application. And so one of my prides there is I worked the whole summer. At the end of the summer, there weren't too many tech support people around. I think 2 people got hired the same week I did, but they were in and out. And there was 1 week, my first summer there, where they needed someone to go on site to, I want to say it's called Mintz Levin. It's one of the largest law firms in Boston who was using our software. And I had to go out and buy a suit because I didn't own one yet. They sent me, I fixed it in about a day, and I think they had me come back for half a day afterwards just to make sure everything was good. And I made enough in that day and a half, I think, based on the bill rate they billed me out at to pay for my summer there. That's the difference there. So really enjoyed it though. Went back and worked a couple of like winter breaks. When I would come home, I'd go help them out, just work for a couple hours. But when I graduated, they made me an offer as an engineer kind of in the support group. And I was really excited about that. I mean, they really gave me a lot of credit for understanding the application and knowing my skill set. To come in, we're not really at the ground level. So even though I was in the support organization, to be a full engineer, which I was really excited about. I think I did that for 6 months before I ended up moving into an engineering team. But they had most of the engineering team focused on a new version of the app. And so I stepped in to join a team of 2 others that were going to manage and build the old version of the app. And then another 6 months after that, they got rid of that team and they just merged everybody together. And I did that for about a year until they asked me to take on a team by myself. And it was a support engineering team of the new application. But obviously they could have asked anybody to do that. I had to go hire 3 people at, I think I was 2.5 years out of school, maybe 2 years out of school, hiring people all older than me. It definitely was not by design. But, I enjoyed it a lot. It was a great experience. I'd made a ton of mistakes, but I had really good leaders, good mentors that I looked to kind of help me understand what it looked like to be a really good leader, to be someone who tries to get the most out of their team. And I tried to follow that with my team. And I think it went well. I did that for about a year, about 6 months as a support engineering lead and manager, and then 6 months for a full engineering manager. And then one of my mentors, one of the guys who I really respected the most as a manager, and asked me to try to join a consulting company. And the biggest reason I did that was because it wasn't my plan wasn't to become a manager 2 years out of school, right? I loved it. I loved leading. I actually did a lot of teaching back then and religious school teaching and whatever I could do to help. And I thought that was very similar. But I just didn't think I had that technical base to be someone I would respect. And I always remember my professors in school that I respect are the ones who had been in industry. Those people who had always been in academia, they didn't know what they were talking about. They read it in a book. But the people who had their hands dirty, I really respected those. So I went and did some consulting, worked for a company called Aptaros doing open source consulting. And the goal there for me was to the people I respected the most technically had all done some form of consulting, some form of software aggregation or integration or something. And that's what I was really looking for. How do I accelerate my growth and understanding on the technology side so that when I could then go be a manager, I knew what I was talking about. I wasn't just making it up.
Right. Well, and when you go out and consult, you really have to be able to think on your feet and go out and you're also selling at the same time. I mean, it's a whole different deal than working internally at a company. When you are a true consultant, I mean, that's all I employ pretty much. That's the people that work for my company. They go out there and they're the feet on the ground and they're representing my company. It's like, you got to have some really good people. And when you get them, you got to hold on to them like they're gold, because they are gold. So what I was going to ask you about was, we talked about it before. We met when you were at, right after US Oncology got picked up by McKesson and became McKesson Specialty Health.
Yeah.
Tell me about working with a company, oncology, that you deal with cancer patients and technology that's going to help out cancer patients. What's that like to work with a company where you're really making a difference with people?
It's why I really, that was the time I really pivoted my career into healthcare technology. Like, I've been in healthcare IT since I actually did a lot of consulting for McKesson. And then ultimately US Oncology. And my first project for US Oncology was when I was consulting. I built a oncology provider portal so that oncologists all around the country inside of the US Oncology network could discuss clinical cases. And, I would watch those cases because I was supporting it. That was supposed to be a 14-week total project. I did it for 9 months. And I got to see a lot of the conversations and the discussions about what they were working on and kind of the different things they could do. Some of it was scary. Like, the options were surgery, chemo, or steroids. And I'm like, how are those the three options? Like, there's got to be a clearer path in those three. But it motivated me to enable those who didn't know the answer to those questions to connect to those that could. Was a big deal for me. That was something I could contribute from a technology perspective. That the people with the medicine who just couldn't scale the same way that I could help them scale. And so that was something that was really exciting to me. It's funny, when I was back in my Steel Point days and I was a new manager, I used to talk to the mentor who I mentioned before, this guy Adam Michelson, about how to motivate a team. And back then we were working on litigation support software. We were mostly working for people defending cases. We worked on the Enron case and not really the good side. So it was really tough to motivate people in that scenario. We talked about how, I remember having the conversation, which was, if you were someone and your job every day was to go in and put a chemical into a different vial and hundreds of vials, and that's all you did every day, but you knew one of those could be the cure for cancer, you would never have a problem getting out of bed every day. Right. And so, when I moved to US Oncology, I really had that in my mind, that if there's anything that I could do that helps, not maybe cure, but at least treat a patient, help someone get the cure, the care they need, the connection to the right provider, the data they needed, maybe just make their life a little bit less miserable, then it was very worthwhile compared to oil and gas or any other industry that I could go into.
That's awesome. Well, I got an interesting story. So it was when you and I first met, had some people working for you, and I came out to Texas, and we went to dinner at a steakhouse, and there was some manager that was coming out to meet us. I can't remember her name. Was her last name Love?
Oh, Kathy. Yeah.
So I was still drinking at the time, and I think maybe I had like 3 Manhattans before she got there. It wasn't a very good meeting on my part. And I remember trying to talk to Kathy after that, and she didn't return my call. So thank God I don't drink anymore. It's the good part about that story. But I remember waking up afterwards and going, I don't think that went very well. I remember it was a great steak and great drinks, but the reason I was there, probably not the best idea on my part.
A little bit, yeah. That's funny.
So let's transition over to where you're at right now. Sounds like another great company that can really do some great things for people. So pediatric urgent care. What do you guys do?
So I joined the company almost 6 months ago now, but they've been around for 9 or 10 years. And the two guys who started this, Kevin Pierce and Brian White, they wanted to go invest in something, but wanted to invest in something and build something that they really believed in. They knew that there was a lot of opportunity in the urgent care space, but saw that they really wanted to address a gap. They didn't just want to do what everybody else was doing. They wanted to go fill a gap, and they didn't see a lot of urgent care focused in the pediatric space on kids, right? So you can take your kid to a general urgent care, but they don't have pediatricians there. You don't have someone who specializes in kids. Right. And so they started that in the Woodlands, actually. That was one of their first facilities, I think. I've actually taken my kids there, but before I ever got involved with these guys. And they just had a great service, and they really differentiated themselves on fiscal responsibility and great service, and really focusing on bringing the best care they can, the most convenient way to parents. That was their goal. And so about 3 years ago, for a couple reasons. One, because of just the seasonality that comes across in that urgent care need, especially for kids. Falls are crazy. Flu season is crazy. But, in the summer and late spring, a little bit less. It's pretty soft. And so they were looking for some other ways to diversify the business. And also just looking at the trends in the industry again, they saw that there was a really big opportunity in telemedicine. And so there's actually a second brand that we run under called Virtual Care for Families. Used to be Virtual Care for Kids. And the idea there initially was to help parents when they're, it's 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, and they've got a young child and they just don't know if they should go in or not. Give them that opportunity to get a hold of somebody, save them a trip, give them a little more confidence. And there's a big opportunity there. I think Kevin and Brian were both their kids were probably around that age, that like 4 or 5, 8-year-old age at that time. And they just knew that there was an opportunity for that. And so they expanded into virtual medicine, really without any technology help. They worked with some partners that they had, some out of the box vendors, but started going down this path. And within a year, they ended up getting connected with the El Paso school district. And El Paso was looking for a partner to help them address some needs within their own school district, specifically around just their underserved population and making sure that as much of their community could get seen with proper medical care as possible. And it came in two flavors. One is they just had a lot of kids that were missing school. And so, sometimes those kids were just not getting the right access to care they needed. And so they were looking for someone to come in and bring that healthcare service right into where they already were, which was the school, and then school's nurse. School's nurses really aren't allowed to do very much, even though they're capable of a lot. And so what we work with them to do is give them access to our providers. So our doctors are on the line. Those doctors can now issue orders through the tests or administration of medication. They can give them Advil, Tylenol, Zofran for nausea. And now because the doctor says it's okay, the nurse can now start giving that stuff to the kids. Where normally they would say, you either got to go back to class or I'm calling mom to pick you up. Those are the only options. The other thing that was important to El Paso is because all of the funding for these schools comes from attendance. And so if kids aren't in school or if they're not getting that doctor's note, they aren't getting their full funding. And that's the other way those kids are suffering because they don't have the money to give them what they need in their programs. And so this was really trying to tackle both of those problems. I wasn't around back then. I heard it went a little rough, but the program was overall successful. And so they were able to carry that forward. And that's what we call our school med program now. And then of course COVID hit, and so the world's kind of been on its head. Um, but we've been able to use the same equipment that we were using for flu tests and strep tests for COVID tests, for rapid antigen COVID tests. And so we've gone from, I think it was El Paso and Austin ISD, and a couple small schools last year. We had a goal of getting to 15 districts. I think we'll be in probably 30 to 35 districts this year. A lot of that driven by the fact that these schools are trying to find a way to safely open, to really, again, meet the needs of their communities through healthcare services, and we can really help with that.
Well, that's awesome. I was going to ask you, good segue. How is COVID, and this is a big thing for a lot of managers and executives, how has COVID changed not only the work environment, but the way that you manage the folks that work for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was still at my last company when COVID hit, and I helped them really in 2 days. I mean, in less than a week, we went from everybody in the office basically, and I had a couple of developers, to everyone
do it fast.
Everything at home. It was a really big change, and we played. I remember just sitting there debating whether we were going to do it, and eventually pulled the trigger. I had to get some Chromebooks, and we just had to do some stuff just to make it work, because we thought it was going to be temporary, right? Everyone, we used Slack really heavily on the engineering side and with some of the support groups, but not sales had never used it. They were just started using it. It went, I would say it went really well for what it was, right? We did a newsletter. We tried to help people understand new ways to work from home, but that was all about the transition. I think I left there to come here in COVID. During COVID, it definitely, being hired during COVID has been a little weird. You don't really meet any of the people you work with. The interviews are mostly done remote. That part's definitely a different world. I remember thinking, every other first job I've ever had, I got a clean haircut and I got a nice outfit, and none of that even made sense.
This one, you just grow your hair out and your beard.
Yeah.
I got to look like everybody else. Grow out the beard.
Yeah, I actually shaved. So I had a full beard. I had my COVID beard, and I shaved for my first day of work. And, they didn't know the difference. But for me, that was the closest thing I had to that. And then I've hired a team. I've gone from nobody. I was the first technologist in the company, and I joined the beginning of May. I have 3 full-time employees and 7 contract employees working with me right now. And again, except we actually, because we do COVID testing, I actually invited all of the members of my team who are local here in Austin to come into the office. And we actually did rapid testing of everyone before we brought them in. So everyone would have the comfort of being in a spot. They got to see the experience, and, I want people to see what we do and understand what it is, not just the technology, but the physical piece, the operational piece. But then we also had to have a real meeting and meet some of these people, but almost everyone in the room had never met each other before. But we spend, I spend a decent amount of time on Teams. We use Teams here instead of Slack. That's gone a long way. We have a stand up every day on Teams. Once a week, we do a team online hour. We spend at least an hour. We actually, today was our day. We almost spent 2 hours. And we just turn on our mics, turn on our cameras, and just work on whatever we're already doing. If we have a question, we throw it out there. It just makes it feel a little bit connected without being really intrusive. I think that's really helped the team. And then we now have this goal of getting together once a month to reset. And so we're really switching to more of these special days to be together, as opposed to before all of this, it was you're allowed to work from home certain days. Now it's the opposite, right? We want you to come in on certain days. And I think that's probably going to be the long-term trend. The other one is I'm hiring people that are in Houston, people in Boston. Not saying I wouldn't have done that before, but with a lot more reluctance. And now, not that big a deal. People are going on vacation, and they're taking some of their work with them. And because they can get a full, you're going to go for 3 weeks, and you might take a week of that for vacation, but you could take your work with you and pretty much do it the same way you always have. So, I think from that part, it's been really great. The hardest thing for me is I'm a big believer in, like I said, having the team really experience what our users are doing. And that one's a lot harder in this environment. It's really hard for me to help them really appreciate what it's like to go through being in a nurse's office, having 6 kids lined up outside the door while you're trying to get the iPad to work, that kind of stuff. So that's the challenge, but I think it's overall been positive. The other one is trying to remind. I know when this happened when I first started doing the COVID thing, and I haven't done as much lately, but probably need to remember too, which is telling people to turn off at the end of the day, right? Like, it's 5 o'clock. If you haven't been outside, if you haven't done something different today, go do something.
If you haven't taken a shower,
yeah, I don't want to hear about it, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely some of that going on, right? Like, you don't want someone to burn out. It's so easy to do. You've just got nowhere else to go in a lot of places, and even though the world's starting to open up, it's not just the remote piece of it. It's the fact that people are isolated, and this is an opportunity to be connected in some ways, but also to make sure this isn't the only way you're doing it.
Yeah, you're still a human being. Go out and be a human being for a few minutes. So one of the things you said there kind of reminded me that I've been in this business for 26 years, and so many people didn't want to hire anybody who wasn't on site. And some people have been moving more and more towards that. And this COVID just turned everything completely upside down. And I don't see it changing. It's really, people are going to get used to it. People are already used to it. And for technologists, it's going to be really hard to, change people from working remotely to going back to going in the office, 5 days a week or, whatever it is. So it's really, really an interesting thing to see people just go, okay, that's the way it's got to be. Let's do it. And it's really changed everything.
I mean, it's a trust thing too. And I think it's really good I've been a big believer for a long time in enabling people for success and setting them up for those situations. Not having the kind of micromanagement hands-on, I'm going to tell you how to do it. And I think this has really forced that issue quite a bit for a lot of managers who just have no choice. If you were that hands-on, I'm going to tell you exactly how to do your job, I don't think you have a chance of doing that anymore. And you're either going to change or you're going to go find something else to do because you just couldn't do that now. And I think it's really going to help teams get better at what they do. And it also differentiates the people who can be self-driven and get work done versus those that can't. Those that can't just won't be successful in this. They're going to have to go find something else to do because that won't work long term. But this has really forced that issue.
So one of the things I was going to talk about here was you had mentioned it before. You got an older brother, and he was a big influence. Kind of talk about that a little bit, because I'm an only child, so I really like to dig into the family dichotomy a little bit. Tell me about your older brother, and tell me how he kind of influenced you.
Sure. So I've got 2 siblings. I've got an older brother. He's about 10 and a half, 11 years older than me. Technically my half brother, but I mean, to me, he's just my brother. I've got a younger sister, a sister 2.5 years younger than me. So when I was growing up, he was, by the time I remember anything, he was already pretty much in high school. The first memories, kind of early on memories I have of him. But he was always looking out for me. He was never too cool for me. He got me cool toys. He watched cartoons with me. We would watch movies or cartoons in the morning or in the afternoon, and we'd eat popcorn together, and he'd eat with chopsticks. So I learned how to use chopsticks eating popcorn. I still do it today. Everyone thinks it's fun. It's weird, but
that's
I
awesome.
Love it. But no, so he's always been that just kind of that older figure. My dad was awesome, but he's my dad, and my older brother just wanted to have fun and just be a great person, but good friend to me. But he was always so many steps ahead, right? 10 years is a long time. So I always really just respected him. When I got to high school, he ran track and played soccer. And so, those weren't my things, but I played basketball and I really wanted to do that. I knew he had been in the National Honor Society, so that was really important to me for a long time. I just really wanted in a lot of ways to, I don't want to say be a peer to him. Like, that wasn't my goal necessarily, but to get to the level where he was, and he was just so far removed. It's a little funny because he's probably about 5'10", 5'11", and I was 6 feet tall before I got into high school. So I've been bigger than him in a long time. We've actually joked a lot about he's my older brother, not my big brother. But that's just always been my goal, was to do that. And then, as I got into college, was where things did change a little bit. Like, he's in marketing. That's always been his job, and he's great at it. He's just really innovative in how he thinks through through more of an artistic landscape. But when he was trying to figure out what sort of what web pages needed to be, and I was going through that computer science degree, and he was calling me, and I was helping him with HTML as I was learning it, and so we actually got to spend some time there for a little while. There's just so many things about my brother that I've enjoyed and appreciated about him, and I really think the way that he treats everybody, in my mind, with respect, and the way that he's always been just made time for whoever needed it. At least that's how I perceived it. Now, who knows what it was really like, right? But that's how my perception of it. And I really think that influenced, my upbringing and kind of who I became, with trying to treat everybody with respect and that same type of patience and thoughtfulness that I really think he did for me.
Well, perception's everything. It's like going and looking back at. I'm writing a book right now. It's called True Ambition. And going back and looking at your life and re-examining things and trying to figure out how you ended up or why you ended up where you ended up. Perception's everything. Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't really matter what's going on. What matters is the way you look at things in your head. Because if you look at everything through a negative lens, your whole world's negative. But if you look at everything through a positive lens, good things are going to happen. And it doesn't even, maybe not good things are going to happen, but you're thinking good things are happening because you're looking at them that way.
Yeah, you're ready, and that's how I agree. I talk to my kids about this a lot now, right? Like, my kids are now at the age that I remember being when this was kind of happening to me, and my oldest he's an oldest. He's amazing at everything he does, but he's kind of a perfectionist. Yeah. And so he's really tough on himself. And I try to tell him, if you look at it as you failed, then you're going to feel like a failure all the time, and you're not going to want to keep doing things. But if you look at the successes you have, and you look at the things that you do well, and the opportunity you have to get better, then everything's easy, right? It's just an opportunity to learn. Every strikeout in baseball, if you walk around angry, then you're not going to get any better, and you're just going to get frustrated. But if you walk away and say, what could I have done differently? What can I adjust the next time? You're constantly getting better. And it's just such a different way to look at the world. That preparation and that perception difference of how do you want to look at that experience drives everything around.
Yeah, well, one of the things I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of different things talking about. One of the things that I heard the other day that was awesome was, don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to yourself yesterday. Have you gotten better? Are you striving to get better? Because like I was asking you before about, how you deal with social media with three impressionable boys. It's because they have, thank God I've got a boy too. I'm very glad I don't have a girl, because it's so hard to see some of the stuff that's out there that these girls have to live up to. Yeah. And, it's just, that's not real. That's not real life, and if you just strive to be a better person day after day, that's what I love. And that's what I'm going to try to teach my boy, so, speaking of that, what's, I'm sure you do a lot of, reading. What's one of your latest, and greatest books that you've read recently? I like to kind of let people know what, all my guests are reading at the time.
Yeah, I just started a new one. Can't even think of the name right now, but the last one I read before that was, I'm a big Patrick Lencioni fan, however you say his name. Five Dysfunction of a Team, all of those. But he wrote one recently called The Motive, I think is the name of the book. And it's, all of his books or most of his books are written as kind of business fables. I think that's what he calls them. They're short stories where you learn a lesson through it, and then he breaks down that lesson, that business lesson. But I really enjoyed The Motive. it's very much about leadership, but not how to, not the how of being a leader, because a lot of his books are about how to be a leader. This one's really about why. Why do you choose to be in that role of leadership? What is it that drives you to be in that role? And are you in it for the right reasons? I read a lot. I'm constantly reading, trying to find something new to help me do something a different way. And a lot of the stuff's the same, in all honesty. The techniques are slightly different. But what I find by reading these different things is every time I read something, I pick up something different. And a lot of times it's a reminder of something I know, but I just don't think about anymore. And I find, in this book in particular, like I've known for a long time, I've always known why I wanted to be a leader, why that's something that really excites me. When I was a kid in high school, I wanted to be a teacher, actually. Being a manager, being a leader has been sort of my alternative to that.
Right.
But it was always about the people you're helping. It's not about me or my job or my role or if I can do it better. It's not even about what I'm, what I want to do, the work that I want to do versus the work I don't want to do. It's about how do I make this team better? And that's the responsibility you take on by being a leader. And I think that's a lot about what this book is about. It's doing the hard things that make you a leader that maybe aren't the things you find fun or want to do.
Well, you might have just answered some of the questions for my last question here. And this is the question that everybody who's on the True Ambition podcast gets to end the interview. So True Ambition. So the reason that I call this the True Ambition podcast is that I really wanted to go out and find out what people's true ambitions were. So the quote actually comes from the 12-step program. And it really changed my life about 5 years ago when I read this quote. It says that true ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is the profound desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. When I read that, I've always been an ambitious person. But I found that when I was younger, my ambitions were pointed in maybe the wrong direction, to get money, to get power, to get girls, whatever. Now that I look back at my life a little bit, I see that my true ambitions are a little bit different. I want to ask you, and you just answered some of them there after you were talking about the Motive book. What are your true ambitions, both professionally and personally? And I'll let you take it over.
I think you're right. I mean, I think for me, for a long time, I've really been very focused on how to help people. And again, I wanted to be a teacher. The only reason I gave up on that dream was because I didn't want to go through a very English intensive program when I was so good at math and sciences. And so I took an engineering path. But I've taught religious school forever. I've been coaching sports for over at least 10 years, probably a little bit longer than that. And all of them have that same flavor of setting up the scenario for people to be successful in ways they wouldn't have been otherwise. And I think that's really that gets me up in the morning. That's why I do what I do. I love that I do it in healthcare, and I love the people that I'm doing it with. My peers at this company are amazing people, but at the end of the day, my true ambition is just to continue to have a larger and larger influence on helping people be successful in ways they weren't otherwise, and keep going on in that path. And I think that's true personally as well. It's why I coach. It's why I run the football league. I never even played football. I was more of a baseball, basketball guy. But I find that the skills that I've learned and that passion I have for helping kids set themselves up in a way that, again, just on their own, they might not have the same successes or afford themselves those same opportunities, and doing it in a positive way. Because there's lots of ways to motivate people in a negative way, but doing it in a positive way, a little more rare. It's becoming more popular now, but it wasn't always. And so that to me, that's my true ambition, is just helping people see that there are positive ways to influence and lead people.
Well, that's awesome. I want to thank you for coming on and doing this, the True Ambition podcast. I really appreciate knowing you for as long as we have. And as soon as all this COVID stuff is done, I'll be coming out to see you in person out there in Austin, and we'll go out and see a band. Maybe even
awesome.
bare naked ladies. Who knows?
That would be fantastic.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
It was great to see you, John. We'll talk to you soon, man.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The True Ambition podcast is brought to you by IT Avalon. For more information and links to other episodes, please visit www.trueambition.org. Now, go find your true ambition.